Ignatius Press and the Augustine Institute present the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter. If you like us, please help us by subscribing and by reviewing us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you might listen. And don't forget to sign up for weekly updates and study questions at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club, where Vivian Dudro, our star commentator, myself, Father Fessio, and Joseph Pearce continue to discuss The Spirit of Liturgy by Joseph Ratzinger. We ended up last time not completing the last chapter of Part 2. Part 2 is on time and space in liturgy. The last chapter is on sacred time. And Ratzinger here speaks about the sanctification of the day of the week with the Sabbath, and of the year with feasts. But we ended up manifesting our confusion and ignorance last session because we were fairly certain that the Orthodox Easter is not on the same date as the Latin Easter. However, both of them calculate Easter as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. And since that day every year is exactly the same for everybody, how can it be that the Easter in the Orthodox Church is sometimes or almost always a different date from the date in the Western Church? And the answer is because they're still using the Julian calendar, and we use the Gregorian calendar, and those calendars are 13 days off, that they don't calculate the vernal equinox, they use March 21st as the date, no matter what's happening with the moon, you know? And so that's the reason why the Easter is celebrated at different dates. They're not looking at the vernal equinox, they're looking at March 21st.
Okay.
So that was interesting to find that out. Also, an interesting factoid here for cocktail party is that Teresa of Avila was never born, because when they shifted from the Julian calendar to the Gregorian calendar, they cut out 13 days. It was in 1571, when she was born. So they cut out the days which included her birthday.
But I told you last week that I was telling everybody for years that Shakespeare and Miguel de Cervantes died on the same day because it was St. George's Day, 1616, until someone pointed out to me that actually at that time England was still refusing to use the Gregorian calendar because it was anti-papist. So actually they were actually born, they died 13 days apart, although it was both on the feast of St. George.
All right, so we're on page 114/100. I refer to the pages of the commemorative edition here, which is the latest one, and the original edition here, my beat up one, which is underlined very copiously. So in the middle of page 114, we read that we should also say the Jewish tradition gave the date of March 25th to Abraham's sacrifice. As we shall presently see, this day was also regarded as a day of creation. Very early on, also the day of Christ's death, and eventually the day of his conception. That was the day that a lot of symbolic meanings converged. And I only found this out some years ago, but up until, I think, the Middle Ages, the year in the West began on March 25th. That was the first day of the new year.
Yeah, I mean, for me, this was all extra ammunition, because when I speak about the Lord of the Rings, I put a great emphasis upon fact that March the 25th is the Feast of Annunciation, which obviously Catholics at least know, but very few Catholics know that it's traditionally seen as the date of the crucifixion. But now, also the date of creation, the Jewish tradition, the date of Abraham's sacrifice, which obviously connects with the crucifixion. And then I did know that in many countries in Europe in the Middle Ages, it was also New Year's Day, which theologically, of course, makes much more sense than January the 1st, which is a random date in the middle of the Christmas season. In happier times, merrier times, we'd return to March 25th as New Year's Day would make all sorts of sense. And again, the connection with Tolkien is that Tolkien chooses March 25th as the date on which the ring is destroyed, thereby connecting the ring synonymously with sin, which is also destroyed on March the 25th. So, and that unpacks the deep theology of Tolkien's myth. So it's all connected to Tolkien's knowledge, of course, of this medieval understanding and early church understanding of the significance of dates.
And also the new creation. So destruction of sin on Mount Doom, new creation. Of course, now in the church's year, we begin with the first Sunday of Advent. And I think that's a more meaningful way of dividing up the year. It really focuses on why the cosmos is meant for history. That is, the whole reason we have these cycles is so we could have something into which we could insert the historical reality of salvation history. The 115, at the top, he wants to make two further remarks in the middle of the page. When the Sunday after the first full moon of spring comes to be the date of Easter, the symbolism of sun and moon are linked together. And this is typical Ratzingerian, how he sees into the symbolic meaning of ordinary things. Transitoriness, which is the moon, which waxes and wanes, is taken up into what never passes away, the sun. Death becomes resurrection and passes into eternal life. Finally, continuing the next paragraph, he says, we should add that for Israel, Passover was not simply a cosmic festival, but essentially aimed at historical remembrance. And we're going to see, we already see it in this book, that he sees Christianity as uniting the cosmic and the historical, creation and redemption. From the very beginning, he sees the 8 days of creation, 7 days of creation as leading up to a day of Sabbath, a day of rest. It's there. God created the world in 7 days so that at the seventh day after all of our work, we could turn to him, the author of it all. I'm going to move to page 117. You can always interrupt me here for something in between. He brings up this interesting question. Well, wait a minute. We celebrate Easter in the spring. It's very symbolic, new life and everything. But that's because the saving events took place in the Northern Hemisphere. What about now that Christianity has reached to the South Africa, or especially places earlier than that, like Australia, South America? What about that? They celebrate Easter in the autumn time. So should Easter in the Southern Hemisphere be celebrated in the springtime down there, which would be our autumn, say September, something like that? He's going to say no, page 118, 4 lines down. But the historical does not serve the cosmic. So we don't change the historical date because of the fact that in the cosmos, the Southern Hemisphere doesn't have spring when we do. To believe the Incarnation, a couple more lines, means to be bound to Christianity's origins, their particularity, and in human terms, their contingency. So it's a contingent thing that happened in the Northern Hemisphere. It happened, on what we call Easter Sunday now. And that's more important than the cosmos. History is. History fulfills the cosmos. And therefore, we shouldn't be changing to enculturate the Mass or the liturgical year by changing the date of Easter for the Southern Hemisphere. And then he goes on the bottom of that page. In the Passover of Jesus, there is, so to speak, a coincidence of Easter, spring, and the Day of Atonement, autumn. Christ connects the world spring and autumn. Again, that's a what do you call it? A creative thought. I've never seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
But he's saying that now because we have Christianity in the Southern Hemisphere, they can help us see more dimensions of what we've already been celebrating.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that Yom Kippur, which is the Day of Atonement, which is in which the sin is laid upon the head of the goat and sent out into the desert.
And a woman I knew who was from Australia said this very thing, that on a personal level, yes, of course, she knows the history of where Christianity took place and why the liturgical calendar developed the way it did, but that, say, for example, the fact that they celebrate Lent during the autumn, well, it is a time of pruning and old dying in order to make way for the new.
Not a time of pruning, but it is a time of things corrupting, getting old, dropping from the trees at least. They actually prune in the wintertime when things are dormant.
Well, you can't do that in some places. Can't do it in 3 feet of snow in Chicago. If you haven't pruned your trees by then, you're in trouble.
Well,
but of course, in Australia, they don't have snow. But the point is that this time of things dying, seemingly dying and going dormant and going through a time of transition. So whether it's, the fact is, both spring and fall are times of transition, right? And so she was just enriching my understanding by saying that how they experience transition fits even though the seasons are reversed for them. Anyway, I'd never even thought about it before until she said that. And then when I read this here in Ratzinger, I thought, okay, so...
She might have read the book.
Maybe so. She was a good Catholic. I don't know.
Onward, page 120, third of the way down or so. The theology of the Incarnation and the theology of Easter do not simply stand alongside each other. No, these are the two inseparable focal points of the one faith in Jesus Christ, the Incarnation, the incarnate Son of God and Redeemer. And so, again, he wants to link Easter and the Incarnation, which is not the same as Christmas, although we're talking about Christmas here, because the Incarnation takes place, March 25th, 9 months before Christmas. Bottom of the page, 10 lines up. Having been recognized as a focal point of faith in Christ, the Incarnation had to be given some expression in the liturgical celebration, some place in the rhythm of sacred time. So, we didn't have all these feasts in the Christian church at the beginning. We had the Jewish feasts. And of course, Passover was the Feast of Feasts. And that's the Feast of Feasts for Christians too. But once you recognize the Passover, the crucifixion and resurrection as central, well, then you think, but what's connected to that? Well, one thing connected to that is when God becomes man. And that's the incarnation. And when that human incarnation becomes manifest. I think one reason Christmas is a holy day and March 25th is not, although I think it should be. It's an odd thing in the churches. There's 11 universal holy days. Different countries pick out ones they want for their country, but there's 11 of them, and it includes St. Peter and Paul and St. Joseph. Well, those are important feasts, but not as important as March 25th, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is the moment at which the divine enters into the temporal, into the human. And it's not a holy day. I mean, of obligation. It's a holy day for sure.
To me, that's the biggest sort of sore thumb sticking out of the liturgical year. The fact that the Annunciation is not a holy day of obligation. That seems to me to be a sin of omission, crying to heaven for rectification.
Okay, but here I think, I'm just guessing at what the reason might be, is that the Incarnation is a hidden mystery. Mary keeps that within her. She ponders on that. The birth is when it becomes public. And so it's the public awareness and recognition. Like, we don't celebrate our conception day, even if we know it, we know it, but I mean, I suppose you could. Some cases, we celebrate our birthday. Well, why is that? Well, because that's when, the child comes out from his womb. So, yeah, I agree with Joseph.
obviously I'm not disagreeing with any of that, but certainly, in the culture of death in which we find ourselves, and the widespread practice of infanticide, a feast which would emphasize that the life of Jesus Christ began at his conception and not at his birth, would actually be quite symbolically powerful in the culture in which we find ourselves, apart from any other theological reasons for wanting it.
So on 121, he mentions again that the 25th was considered to be the conception, but it got that way because they had December 25th as his birth. So they subtracted 9 months and figured it must be March 25th. That's the conception. Page 122, towards the bottom.
Actually, Father, if I may, I do have a question on the middle of page 121. I just want you to discuss this, because we got this from in AD 243, emanating from Africa. We find March 25th interpreted as the day of the world's creation, and Chaucer in the Canterbury Tales says that that March was the month that the world was created. But obviously, in a literal sense, March the 25th is connected to the year, the Earth revolving around the sun and what have you. So obviously, right at the beginning of creation, there is no sun, and then presumably, if there is no sun and no Earth, there's no March the 25th. So I'm sort of looking at. I'm assuming this is just symbolically figurative, and we're not supposed to take it literally.
Well, that is true, but it's also the case that there was some argument in favor of March 28th being the first day, because that was when the sun was created, on the fourth day of creation. Yes, it's all. We don't know what day it was created on. We don't even know what day Mary conceived or what day Jesus was born, for sure. Mm-hmm. In fact, we have a wonderful book by Michael Hesemann called Jesus of Nazareth, and it seems likely that the actual birth date of Christ was probably in the spring sometime, because the shepherds are on the fields.
Right, taking their flocks toward Jerusalem for the Passover. And so it, what's amazing to me, the richness of creation, the richness of God's word, making creation. You can find meaning everywhere and everything. You can find links to things no matter where you look. It's almost like you can't go wrong. March 25th, December 25th. You'll find links to things that are there that you can put together.
Yeah, it's Christ's birthday. You can imagine that the disciples, the apostles, would actually know Christ's birthday. Where it was obviously, irrespective of whether it is December the 25th, that the point is that that's a historically verifiable fact that you can imagine, that the apostles might have known and might then therefore have passed it on. Whereas obviously the date on which the cosmos is created by God the Father is a whole different ballgame. That's what I'm trying to say. Really, is that it's not historically verifiable, nor is it cosmically possible for us to measure in terms of 24-hour days before the sun and the earth are created. Therefore, this
even the days of creation is a symbolic thing.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say, is that this is obviously
the whole thing is symbolic.
Yeah,
not the act of creation, of course.
God's cosmic days of creation, each one of them could be 1 billion years. That's the figurative language of Genesis. That's fine. I have no problem with that. I just want to distinguish between the two. That's all.
And Vivian, you brought up this thing that everything has meaning. Did we discuss Thomas Howard's book, Chance of the Dance?
Yes, it was one of our early books.
One of our early books.
Form Book Club.
Because that's a wonderful book I'll recommend again. But he shows this, the dichotomy really between pre-modern culture and postmodern culture, or modern and postmodern culture, that with the age of science, where you learn things by dissecting and breaking them into their parts, and material causes only and efficient causes, nothing means anything. We're just a bunch of molecules if we dissected us and so on. Whereas prior to that, everything was symbolic. not just turtles all the way down, but I mean, it was that the lion, was somehow connected to the king. And the lamb was somehow connected with people who were meek. And so he summed it up by saying, in the new enlightened view, nothing means anything. In the old pre-scientific view, everything means something. That it's all connected, Anyway, you just reminded me of that beautiful book that we discussed, although I forgot it. All right. Page 122. Towards the bottom, Jerome in the sermon says, this has to do with Christmas. The universe itself bears witness to the truth of our words. Up to this day, the dark days increase. From this day, the darkness decreases. Well, he's 4 days off, but I mean...
Okay, speaking of the winter solstice.
Right, the light advances while the night retreats. And then, interestingly, also with the symbolism here on the next page, about 8 lines down, between the 2 feasts of March 25th, the Incarnation, and December 25th, the birth, comes the feast of the forerunner, St. John the Baptist, on June 24th, at the time of the summer solstice. Again, 3 days off, but I mean, the link between the dates can now be seen as a liturgical and cosmic expression of Baptist words. He must increase, but I must decrease. That's a beautiful idea that you celebrate John the Baptist in the middle of June when it's the longest day of the year, and the days become to decrease until Christmas. All of a sudden, Christ is born, and now the light increases again.
Yeah, I highlighted that as well. That was a fascinating observation by Ratzinger.
Then page 124, maybe 8, 9 lines down, the narrative of the adoration of the Magi, which is a Christmas event, became important for the Christian thought because it shows the interconnection. Boy, when he uses that word, this is something important. Between the wisdom of the nations, because the Magi represented the Gentiles, and the word of promise in Scripture, because it shows how the language of the cosmos and the truth-seeking thought of man lead to Christ.
So it's sort of saying that it's the fusion of philosophy and theology, basically faith and reason, right? They come together.
And then finally, he's talking about the Feast of the Saints in the middle of page 125, the middle of that text there. Beautiful thought here. One might say that the saints are, so to speak, new Christian constellations in which the richness of God's goodness is reflected. And that's a beautiful thought. There's a firmament, we look up, there's the sun, there's the moon, there's Christ, there's the church. But now there's these stars, these constellations that represent the brightness that is given to the cosmos through the lives of the saints. And that reminds me of a book, which I believe we published The Fisherman's Net by Adrian from Spire. Does Fisher Nets?
No.
We have not. Oh, we have to.
Glad to hear that.
Because that Adrian from Spire, who was the directee of von Balthasar, and a mystic, he thinks, and I believe he's right. At one point, she had this vision of just numbers going up, like little bingo balls, in the 21, 136, 51, 52. And so she write them down. And she had, it was everything equal 153. This number plus that number is 153. That number plus this number is 153. And she didn't know what it meant. And Balthasar says, well, I want you to go into under Venus. I want you to go into meditation now and find out what that means. Well, the interpretation that she got in prayer was that, of course, 153 is the number of fish in the net. That's the fisherman's net, which represents the catch, all the people are redeemed. But then all these numbers were prime numbers. That is, 5 is a prime number, 13 is a prime number, and 29 is a prime number. Anyway, so it turned out that each of these prime numbers represented a saint, but not just a saint who fit into this constellation of saints in some kind of a paradigmatic or archetypical way. And so 13, for example, was Ignatius's number,
11. He's
Oh,
11.
well, I'm sorry, 11. You're right. 13 is Francis, I think.
Francis is 17.
Oh, 17. Who's 13? All right. Thank you, Thomas Jacoby, who's not just our technical support here, he's also my corrector, my admonitor. But in any event, when she described these other saints, it might be that 11 plus 17 plus something. Well, this saint manifested in his life the obedience of Ignatius and love of poverty of Francis. And so she saw the other saints as being kind of combinations of previous saints. It's an interesting, anyway, it's maybe just a little spiritual game, but it's interesting. So you know something? We're about a half hour into this now.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good place to stop because we finished section 2, part 2, and we'll start with part 3 on our next section, art and liturgy. And this chapter, the question of image, is so beautiful because at the end, he actually goes through the periods of Christian art in the West: Romanesque, Gothic, Baroque, Renaissance, Contemporary, and he shows the strengths and weaknesses of them. Pretty fascinating. Well, we'll see you next session. We'll discuss that.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.